I am constantly, consciously thinking, what is the minimum thing of value that we can get delivered to the customer as soon as possible? So with the constant echo of, yes, we'll do that feature eventually because there's value to it, but we'll get to that later. Let's not delay the current sprint to fit that thing in. I probably have a conversation with at least one developer on a weekly basis saying, let's not do that feature right now, because the priority is to get this thing, whatever it is, in the customer's hands so that they can start getting value from it. Unlike building a product where you're building to a spec and then there's not a whole lot of plan to iterate a ton. In our line of business, the way we tend to work with our customers is we're going to iterate and constantly make things better. And so the sooner we can get something in the customer's hands for them to gain value, we get better feedback, they get value for their money, which is always good. That way everybody wins. And then we can add in those additional features and niceties and things that make things better. Were I the customer, I would much rather have something that is 70% of the way, but is still maybe not perfect from a UX standpoint, and have that in a month or 2 months, rather than waiting for 5, 6, 7, 8 months to get something that is 100%. If I have expressed to Harmonic, hey, I've got this problem, can you help me solve it? I want that problem solved or starting to be solved. I want myself empowered to solve that as soon as possible. I don't want to wait for perfect.
So we're going to talk about your presentation you gave recently on systems thinking.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for a presentation on systems thinking?
Amazon is the very short answer. Amazon had recommended a book to me called Thinking in Systems. I just saw the summary of the book and I was like, hey, that sounds interesting just personally. I always like thinking in broader patterns, broader systems. And when I bought the book, I didn't directly see any work application. I just thought, this looks interesting. And as I got into reading it, I was like, oh, this actually does have work implication. And so I was really fascinated about the stuff I was learning just in the first few chapters. So like when I gave the presentation, I was only a third of the way through the book, but I was already gaining value from it. And I thought some of the things the author was pointing out and things to look for in systems and how they functionally work at a kind of universal level, I was like, hey, this is something of value that I can talk about. And I'm not the expert yet. I'm still learning. Haven't even finished the book yet at the time. But I wanted to kind of share what I was learning. So thanks, Jeff Bezos, I guess.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos recommended this book. So I imagine there's a few things that stood out for you in terms of the value, but is one of those like balancing and reinforcing loops?
Yeah, so one of the things I talked about in that presentation was two of the attributes of systems are balancing loops and reinforcing loops. And for me, the thing that was really enlightening was the author's observation that there are always balancing and reinforcing loops. And as a result, for instance, reinforcing loops, if the reinforcing loops are stronger than the balancing loops, that will definitionally always cause the system to grow exponentially. And if the balancing loops are stronger than the reinforcing loops, the system will always decay, guaranteed, because that's just how the math and stuff works. And so if you are trying to look at a system, whether that's a biological system, an economic system, a policies and procedures in a workplace, governments, all sorts of different systems, both natural and human created, they can get complex. But if you want to understand how different things are interacting with each other and want to identify how to improve the output or mitigate against the downsides or encourage some certain behavior, etc., it helps to identify what are those things that are holding us back, or what are those things that are adding fuel to the fire in a good way. And therefore, how can we do more of those things that add fuel to the fire and kind of increase our acceleration, whatever that means in whatever context? And how can we minimize the things that are holding us back?
So when it comes to software development projects, can you think of some examples of balancing and reinforcing loops, maybe as it relates to where the project is in the production cycle? Or
one of the first reinforcing loops that comes to mind is developer confidence and subject matter expertise. If a given developer understands the scope of the project that they're being asked to work on, in the case of a client, understands kind of their business space and understands the problem space enough and the data objects that are at play and how they interact and that sort of thing, their individual understanding contributes to them synthesizing better, coming up with better solutions, identifying potential problems or potholes in their coding approach. I think one of the things in coding is we are always making assumptions. At some level, you're going to be assuming something. And that may be as simple as assuming that an ID of this record will be present, right? That it's never not going to be empty. Or assuming that when you ask the database for the total of this invoice, that you're going to get a number and not a sentence or a date or something. So you always have these assumptions. And I think the individual developers understanding the specific problem space and the data well enough helps them to make better assumptions and more reasonable assumptions where necessary. I've seen instances where a developer will make an assumption about something that will always be true or will always be false, and that assumption is actually wrong because they don't understand the problem space or the data well enough. Then that causes, in the worst case scenario, causes faulty code to go into production. Slightly worse case is it causes rework in the code to fix those things. So the more knowledgeable the developer is about what they're trying to solve on the front end, the more likely they're going to, quote, do it right the first time. So I think that's the first reinforcing loop that came to my mind, because the more of that you have, the less I as a director have to do in making sure everybody's doing the right thing, because individual people are competent and then individual people can share with each other that expertise and read other people in. There was a point where a lot of the stuff that I now know about specific areas of our client systems, I didn't know. And other people read me in on those things. Because they did that and I retained that information, I can now read more people in. And then the 4 people I read in, they can read other people in. So it's no longer taking my time to onboard more developers into a particular subsystem of a project.
Is that an example of a reinforcing loop when those?
Yeah, I think so. Because the more of that you have, I think you are reinforcing the quality of things and the speed with which things can go. For instance, there was a few years ago where for certain areas of certain clients' systems, there was like one person here who knew how that thing worked. So if something came up where either there was a bug that showed up or the client requested a change, there was only one person who could really do that work. And if that one person was also the only person who knew how to do 4 other things, then corporately we're blocked, bottlenecked at that one person because there are 5 things demanding their time. Meanwhile, you've got other people who are sitting around who need work to do, have smart hands that can code and do things, but they're not read into something. And I think we've worked over the past several years to proliferate that institutional knowledge across more people. So now, very rare is it that something comes up and there's only one person who knows enough to do that job. There are now multiple people who know how to do that job, which means there are fewer bottlenecks, and it means we can do more work at the same time because we can distribute those things whatever works best.
We're talking about systems. There was an expert in total quality management. This was before your time, named W. Edwards Deming. Have you ever heard that name?
No.
And he was hired by Japanese companies, especially Toyota, to help them implement total quality management because we wouldn't really listen to him here in the U.S. We thought he was a rocker, and ended up revolutionized the automotive industry. Japan overtook the U.S.
Right.
It's crazy. But one of his favorite lines was that the biggest problem in management business is failure to appreciate a system. And so I'm thinking of in these engagements we do with clients, we've got systems dancing with other systems. And if you don't ever look at it from a systemic level, you can't really do your work. So can you think of examples where you realize that clients don't fully understand their own systems? Is part of our job to help our clients better understand their own systems?
For sure. I think there are some instances, particularly in the more complex systems, and particularly in regulated environments, where the customer may ask for a thing or express a need, or they get mandated by some governmental agency that they have to do a thing, and they may not fully understand the implications of what is being asked for, which is particularly true in complex systems where everything is connected to everything else in one way or another. One of the primary areas of value that we bring is helping our customers problem solve their own problems, not just take a request and a scope of work and write the code and deliver some piece of software, but actually help them have vision for, imagine, and build the right thing, and helping them to avoid making a decision that is actually, from this other angle, in this other arena, going to be counterproductive to what they're trying to accomplish.
Did you talk about the overfishing trap? Was that part of your presentation? Or
Yes.
do you remember that?
I do, a little bit.
Okay. So are there ways that, first, can you describe what's meant by the overfishing trap?
Yeah, so this was something that Donella Meadows, in her book, Thinking in Systems, used. So basically all the examples I used in that presentation were straight from her book. And I said that in the presentation. I was like, here it is, page 13, page 45, whatever it is. So one of the examples that she gives is in the fishing industry, is you've got a certain number of fishing boats that go out and fish and catch schools of fish. And the fish themselves are a renewable resource. They will reproduce. There's not a finite number of fish in the ocean, but they regenerate themselves. And so there's this balance where the fishermen can, and the fishing industry can add more boats and bring in more fish without destroying the core population. So they can continue to harvest the golden eggs without killing the goose because the fish continue to reproduce. But there comes a point where you can so overfish and put in all of the extra effort to find those last few fish as the schools of fish become harder and harder to find because there's fewer and fewer of them. And now all of a sudden the rate of consumption of the resource of the fish is faster than the resource, the fish, can replace itself. And at that point, it's just a downward slope. The fish population can't regenerate itself, so the fishing industry catches fewer fish. Therefore, the fishing industry itself, at least in that area for that species, for that period of time, basically goes bust because there's no more resource there to harvest. And that's not ideal for everyone who's relying on the fishing industry for income or whatever the case may be. Right. The balance there is to find where that plateau point is to where you can gain the maximum value out of whatever the resource is, right? Whether it's fish or people or daylight or whatever, to gain the maximum value from that without overutilizing it to the point where it's going to be detrimental for you. At least in my mind, one of the primary challenges to prevent overfishing is people. People are the most important resource in getting a project across the finish line. And so doing our best to protect our people in a way and make sure that people aren't systemically, consistently overworked. There's a personal level to that, individually taking care of yourself and knowing where your personal boundaries are so that you can continue to function, not overworking yourself, eating right, exercise, getting enough sleep, putting your phone down on weekends to decompress a little bit. But I think also from a management and leadership standpoint, it's knowing our people well enough and reading the room well enough to know how much can I push certain individuals and are they being pushed too much? Can I put this extra thing on their plate and they continue to function and be productive, or is this asking too much? I suppose in a way, I'm not a parent, but I would imagine it's kind of like being a parent where you're looking at your children and some of them you can push harder than others. And it's a kind of balancing act there, but preserving that resource, because if you overwork your employees either from a just number of hours or overload them from a stress standpoint or whatever it is, they are either or both going to decrease the quality of their work just because psychologically when you're stressed or upset or mad or whatever it is, basically anything that's not some version of happy, your brain literally functions worse. You have less access to memory, less access to critical thinking skills, you're less creative, all of these things. So the likelihood that people are going to make mistakes, and sometimes critical mistakes, if they are overworked or stressed, is a lot higher than if they're operating within healthy boundaries.
Were you going to talk about people and resources? Are there other resources that you want to be careful about not overextending? Or
another obvious resource is the computer itself. So we have had instances before where a particular server deployment, either for us or for a customer, works fine for what it was doing. And then we add a new thing because the customer requested it and the super cool new whatever it is. And all of a sudden, that particular computer, that server, starts grinding to a halt because now it's underpowered for the additional things we're now asking it to do. And hopefully we catch that, and often we do catch that either in our development stack or in our staging stack, going through our QA process and testing and noticing that this server is actually starting to get overloaded with this new thing that we're about to do. Therefore, we need to increase those compute resources in some way.
Oscillation, does that term sound familiar? So client solutions that were designed to reduce oscillation, wild swings in effort or cost or workload, anything come to mind along those lines?
Yes.
You talked about the car dealership.
Using the car dealership example, I was thinking of oscillation in terms of the cycle of, we have so much business, and so we put a pause on pursuing new business, and then we finish with all of that business that we've got, and then we're like, we don't have enough business. So then we go back out to get new business, and then we end up in a situation where, oh my gosh, we've got so much business, and then we stop. So you end up going through these cycles of way too much and not nearly enough, and understanding the system there, thinking in systems, so to speak, and understanding the oscillations that can happen within a system because of timing delays in feedback that are just inherent to how systems work. There's no getting around that. I was interpreting what I took from her example there in the book was more direct, of looking at it as a sales cycle. I was like, yes, this resonates. I'm not quite sure how the oscillation idea maps onto a specific client scenario.
Yeah. So recently we did this series of presentations and workshops where we developed these pillars, so to speak, of speed, efficiency, efficacy, and repeatability. So can you think of examples where when it comes to speed, we try to be conscious of ways we can shorten feedback loops and increase responsiveness in client projects?
One of the ways to increase speed within our system working on client projects is first to identify what are the things that are governing that speed or that are slowing that speed down. One example of that is communication time, handing off work either from the sales process or from project management standpoint to a developer to start the work, or if that's handoff from design into development, or if that's from development into QA. There's all these different handoff points. And if you are reliant on an in-person face-to-face meeting where two people sit down and spend an hour talking about a thing to hand off and get it started, that is drastically going to decrease speed. So by using our project management tools, using UTrack, which is the platform that we use, and keeping relevant comments and history and stuff in that system and linking to relevant resources, putting updates in that project management system. That way, you, Mark, can write an update on an issue in the system, and I can read it next time I'm available, and our paths never have to cross. And another area where I think we have gotten much better about speed, again, utilizing our project management system to help provide context for a conversation thread, essentially, is using Loom. Shout out to Loom, great product. It allows us to record short videos. And so if I need to hand off work to someone, but I'm in meetings and then they're busy and they're working on something and we just can't get things lined up, I can sit down and make a 5 to 10 minute video or less when I have the time to describe the thing and hand it off, post the link to that video, and that individual can watch it whenever is most convenient for them. And that's been really great. We've also used it in QA and testing. Is someone can record a video of them doing the thing on the computer, whatever it is, proving that the feature works as intended. And we use that internally to validate. We use that externally with our customers, because sometimes you are coding something that is just too difficult for the customer to be able to test, because it's maybe some under the hood stuff and you've got to set up data in just the right way to produce the scenario that this code is trying to fix. And so we will make videos that the customer can watch demonstrating that this bug is indeed fixed or this feature is indeed working as intended. Another place that we have increased speed using Loom is in our testing process. So as we are testing and whoever the tester is discovers a bug and needs to point that bug back to the developer to fix it, it is so much faster for that tester to grab some screenshots or record a short Loom video showing, here's exactly what I clicked on, here was the user I was logged in as, the buttons that I clicked, the options that I chose, and then here's what the screen looked like. Here's what happened. They can post that to the issue, and then that is so much context for the developer, and it gives them a lot of information to then go figure out what went sideways, rather than the tester needing to find the right developer to solve this problem and sit down with them and walk them through all of the different things. That's a huge time suck.
Yeah, it's a great example. And I remember talking to Michael DeJoy, is that his last name?
Yeah.
And he was saying that video, that 6-minute video, we use it all the time.
Yeah.
So when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, so understanding a system, appreciating a system means understanding that asynchronous communication
Yeah.
keeps the flow going.
I think that's a great point about the scalability of having these recordings, these video resources to communicate, is they're not just a one-time use thing. So we've got customers who we made a 5-6 minute video for them showing a thing, and they've been able to distribute that video internally to their users, and it's been watched dozens and dozens or hundreds of times. And that was one person spending 6 minutes once and being able to communicate that to scores of people over months or years of time. And that's a huge win. There have even been instances where I've been pulling the thread on some problem or have been documenting either for us or the customer how a thing works. And 5 months go by and we need to make a change to that thing, or we've got a question about how does that work. And I don't remember. I remember that I knew once upon a time, but I don't know how that thing works anymore. And I have gone back to my own videos to learn how something works. And when coworkers ask, hey, I'm working on this subsystem, how does this thing work? I've been able to say, I don't know, but here is this knowledge base article that I created 6 months ago with a video explaining how this works. And I've been able to point multiple people to that, and then they can point other people to that. And so it's creating these super valuable artifacts to transfer knowledge again and again that scales so well and really contributes to speed and, I would say, efficacy, because now the people working on the project have access to information that they otherwise would have had to either do without or be delayed until they can meet with someone.
Or efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah, efficiency there's a huge one.
You just described a couple of good examples of efficiency. And so another pillar is efficacy. How does seeing the system help us maybe help clients hit the real goal instead of just fulfilling the spec or the project scope?
I think one of the things that contributes to efficacy is working on a project with a process, having feedback loops in the process. And so for us, that sometimes looks like someone doing an initial evaluation of an ask, then assigning that out, that developer coming up with an approach, and then before any code is put down on paper, discussing that with someone else, whether that's me or another director or just with another developer, discussing that approach, refining that idea, and then going and doing it. And then when they think it's right, sometimes that will go into code review, depending on what it is. I mean, if it's make the button blue, it probably doesn't need to be code reviewed, but some things, code review is more valuable with that fine-tooth comb. And then going into a QA process where we're able to bang the thing against the wall and see what breaks and see what works and try all sorts of different creative things.
So in terms of efficacy, what kind of features or dashboards give clients decision-making power instead of just data? Can you give me an example of one?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to give the customer decision-making power goes back to iteration. Oftentimes, we will do a small thing to give the customer access to some piece of their data that previously they didn't have access to. And from a design standpoint, from a UX standpoint, we can imagine all different ways they may want to look at that data or all different things they may want to do with it. But we could spend a ton of time imagining up use cases and user stories and building out features, but we don't know what the customer actually wants yet. And they don't know what they want because they've never had access to this before. And so oftentimes we will deliver them something very basic to give them insight into this data. Sometimes with something as simple as, hey, here's an export to Excel button that allows them to get that data in raw form and then manipulate it in some more familiar program. And then they can decide as they play with it and tilt their head and squint their eyes and imagine how these numbers affect those numbers. They can decide, okay, here's what I want to do with that. Here is how you could display this information, whether it's in some type of graph or giving them buttons to perform certain actions or whatever the case may be. They can then tell us, okay, here are the 3 things we want to be able to do now that we can see this data. From a delivering value to a customer standpoint, and from I would say, effectiveness and efficacy standpoint, is getting something in the customer's hands as soon as possible that has value, particularly if you were giving them something that they've never had access to before. Get something in their hands that has value that they can start playing with, and then you're going to get so much more valuable feedback from them on what they now want to do and what they actually want to do with it.
That's a really different, interesting angle on efficacy. Sometimes when you give them efficacy, they have to figure out what to do with it.
And I think there's many times where some companies, some software companies, or any product company will build something, or even we internally are tempted to add features or build things, and it's really cool that it does that, but no one asked for it. It's like the memes online that says nobody blank, and then developers, and there's this like amazing monstrous feature, and the customer may go, that's cool, but we have no use for that thing that you built, and now we're kind of unhappy that we have to pay you for building the thing that, like, it's not that it's buggy, it's not that it's broken, it's just that it doesn't provide them value, right? By analogy, if they need transportation from home to work and they live half a mile away, and the solution we give them is a $400,000 Rolls Royce, and they're like, great, but a moped would have worked fine. Like, it's not that the really cool, awesome thing that we built doesn't work. It's just sometimes way overkill for the size of the problem they're trying to solve and for the value they're going to get from that problem being solved.
What is the importance of repeatability? Why does repeatability matter? And what are we doing to try to improve the amount of stuff that's repeatable?
I think repeatability, first of all, is important because you may have had past success, but if you're not confident that you can replicate that success, then you have to be a one-hit wonder again. In the music industry, there are a number of one-hit wonders who shall go nameless because most people don't know their names, let's be real. And they may have stumbled upon writing a good song. But if they're not aware of what they did to actually write that good song and what elements came together, it makes it really difficult for them to have future career success in that thing. From a software development standpoint, again, this is where systems come into play, and thinking about the system from an angle of repeatability, distributing knowledge, having a knowledge base where people can find things, having repos, for instance, of commonly used functions and code bases that can be starter packs, so to speak, to get a new project started. One of the things we'll do is settle on a particular method to solve this kind of problem. And because we know that when we solve this kind of problem this way, that works. And we know the gotchas there. We know what to do, what not to do. Essentially, we know how to use that hammer. And not that everything then becomes a nail, but when we see a nail, we go, okay, we know this particular approach works and works consistently. There's no reason to go back to the drawing board and come up with a brand new creative solution for some type of thing. So again, that increases speed, it increases repeatability, it increases efficacy, because we're not having to debug some brand new thing, we can just basically copy paste.
What would it look like if we analyzed our client projects the way you described mining towns or fisheries?
So it's interesting that you asked that. It was last week that, like Tuesday morning, I came in and I got this, what I thought was a brilliant idea. And so I've started working on it. But one of the things that would be nice to be able to predict is when we embark on a new project for a customer, whether that's a new customer or an existing customer, whether we are starting work on an existing subsystem and changing it or expanding it, it would be really nice to know what is the statistical probability that something will go wrong given a certain combination of factors. Because some systems, some areas of the code base are more business critical than others. So if we can use AI in some way to, and I've started thinking of data structures to accomplish this and then run statistics against, is to go through our backlog of kind of event history and stuff that's happened and look at when we did work on different subsystems, when that code went live, was there an issue? What was the nature of the issue after that went live? Was the issue actually a problem? Was there actually a coding problem? Or was it just a ghost that was just a phantom? Was it a lack in user understanding of how the thing was supposed to work? Who was needed to help triage that problem? When on the calendar did that go live? Are we more likely to have things go wrong with something going live in December than something going live in June or March or whatever the case may be? And then as we are evaluating or deciding, here is this project, we've done all the work on it, we've done our testing, we now just need to set a go live date. If we can take all of those factors into consideration, and even with our best efforts, we know that, hey, there's still some % chance that something unexpected is gonna happen. We don't know what it is. If we knew what it was, we would fix it ahead of time. But we know statistically, there's a decent chance something's gonna happen. And if that thing happens, who do we need to have on staff that day to help resolve it? If that person is gonna be on vacation next week, we probably should not take this thing live now. We should wait until that person is available. We should not load them up with a bunch of other super pressing work because there's a chance that we'll need them to address whatever unforeseen thing happens. We may decide, for instance, hey, here's this new thing that's super valuable, but the statistical likelihood that something may happen is high enough that, yeah, we do not want to take this live right before Thanksgiving, for instance, and be able to do those. Because otherwise, making those judgment calls is a subjective thing reliant upon individual memories, which is not scalable. And it's also mentally taxing on those few people who are constantly having to rack their brain and make a subjective call about everything. But if we could turn that history into numbers and statistics, that can help us make better decisions and reduce risk for us and, more importantly, for our customers.